Today's manga is Orange by Ichigo Takano. Orange stars Takamiya Naho, a shy and docile high school student who seemingly gets a letter from her future self. Of course, she's at first doubtful of this, as anyone would be, but because the letter gives her predictions of future events that are indeed accurate, she has no choice but to believe it. The reason this letter was sent to her was because Naho's future self is filled with regrets that she doesn't want her past self to repeat. The first of these is to not invite the new transfer student to walk home with her and her group of friends, as she would surely come to regret it. However, Naho still isn't very keen on following these instructions at first, so she passes on the idea for the time being and invites the student anyway. However, like her letter had claimed, this indeed becomes true as she finds out soon afterwards. Thus begins Naho's struggle in order to change the history of events that was written on the letter. So if it's not obvious, Orange is a semi-slice-of-life shoujo manga with a bit of plot momentum pushing it forwards. It's told fairly concisely and tightly as it only lasts 22 chapters. Though thankfully, the pacing introduces just enough interesting development without things feeling too terribly rushed either. Orange is at its most intriguing when the characters' actions start to change the events that were supposed to occur later in the future, which signals for the audience to pay attention to any subtle clues on how the development of a certain character changes over the course of the manga. At its worst, it becomes a slightly redundant affair. Naho's thought process in particular is very circular and basically parrots the same thing every chapter. This serves to make her a rather dull and uninteresting character, but the same could be said for just about everyone else. Speaking of the characters, only 3 really get any focus in the course of this manga, but even that is being a bit generous as it's more like 2. Out of the group of 6 friends, Azusa, Takako, and Hagita are relegated to roles that more resemble cheerleaders than actually fully fleshed out characters. And yes, the 2 girls do indeed dress in a cheerleader outfit at one point. This is because so much emphasis is placed on the core drama/plot that all the characters suffer from it outside of Kakeru, which serves to make them all rather dull and flat. Art-wise, it's pretty decent, but once again, nothing special. Occasionally, characters look too doll-like for my taste, but it's certainly serviceable. The main criticism is that most of the characters make the same aloof expression over and over again whenever they are thinking seriously. It does lose its impact after a while, and in one character's case, while his attitude is mostly justified, it becomes borderline laughable with how often he makes it. Overall, this is a manga that's rather difficult to cover too much of while keeping spoilers at bay. I will say I thought it was indeed better than your average shoujo simply due to its brief length and well-done pacing. Some of the dramatic moments are pretty good as well, but the characters and story fail to impress overall. It never reaches greatness, but I still give it my recommendation simply because it can be finished rather quickly and it's entertaining enough to be worth the read. Still, if you don't like shoujo already, don't expect this one to change your mind. So now it's time for the spoiler section, where we discuss the entire manga. If you haven't read it, then I advise you not to go past here. And once again, sorry I couldn't cover more in the introductory section, but I didn't want any possible spoilers leaking out to people who haven't read it except for the bare minimum, because people get really anal about me about having spoilers, so sorry about that. So the gang invites Kakeru to hang out with him, and you learn that Naho is not a very vocal girl when it comes to anything she might want. For example, she wanted a certain kind of bread, but refused to say anything because she suspected that other characters in the group might want it. However, as chance might have, Kakeru notices these qualities about her. This is also a quality that does indeed lead to frustration when I kept reading, as you learn that she is a bit of a coward and will refuse to perform certain acts despite the letter's demands because she has no self-confidence. Which kind of cues you in why she's the kind of girl who would have a lot of regrets. Though I'm not saying she's necessarily a bad character because of this, because hey, frustration means I'm being entertained by her somewhat, and it is a drama, so that means it made me care at the very least. As for Kakeru noticing these things about her, I don't know if it's just supposed to be a strong trait in his personality, or if he's just very keen on these things because he has to watch over his mother. The main thing gotten out of this is Naho starts to take interest in Kakeru. Naho decides that things worked out fine, so she decides she doesn't necessarily need to follow the letter, and well, also because she's scared of knowing the future. Though her mind changes fairly quickly soon afterwards when she's asked to bat at a game. She frets on it at first, but then decides since her future self told her to, she might as well. And of course, as a result, she succeeds, which makes her gain a bit more confidence that the letters might be leading her in the right direction. But of course, she's going to still be very wishy-washy about following the letter regardless. Her future self then reveals to her that the reason she was writing to her was in fact that she didn't want any regrets and to make sure to watch over Kakeru because in the future, he's already dead. So yes, this is the main goal of the manga. The main thing the entire manga centers on. And that is the character of Kakeru. I was almost being too generous in the opening by saying it focused on even two people, being Naho and Kakeru, as even though we get to see Naho's struggles throughout the manga dealing with this, really, it all revolves around Kakeru. Kakeru is certainly a character I will never forget, even if everyone else is kind of bland. Sadly, it's not because he's a great character or anything, he's okay, certainly more interesting than everyone else, but because the characters, especially Naho, will never, ever shut up about him. In fact, I believe from this point on, his name is repeated at least once every 3 pages, possibly even more than that. Granted, I know it's semi-believable why they focus on him so much in this manga, but Christ, it gets so tiring and redundant by the end. This is where the weak writing comes into play, as basically you're going to be hearing the same 3 phrases over and over until they penetrate through your skull. I don't want any regrets. Save Kakeru, and Kakeru, 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 which is kind of why Naho is very bland, because from this point onwards, she becomes incredibly one-track minded. It's nice we focus on her struggle, but because she never really goes outside the box much, she never really truly shines as a character on her own, and is only that character that's really obsessed with Kakeru. Though, forgive me, Naho, because that's unfair, as basically every character is the same in this regard for the most part. Anyway, you were also given these constant flash-forwards to the future while reading. They have Naho and Suwa married with a kid, and the rest of the gang visiting Kakeru's grave on his birthday. At this point, I'm sure most readers were wondering if Naho was going to end up with Suwa or Kakeru if they actually managed to save him. And don't worry, I'll tackle that whole mess later. Naho can't believe the letter right away about Kakeru's death and proceeds to just examine his instructions day by day for now. Her next goals are to make him lunch and to somehow get him to join the soccer club. She attempts this but fails to give him lunch because, like said, she's just too shy. Then comes an incredibly overdramatic move from her when Kakeru wonders what's in her bag and she smacks his hand away. Anyway, this tussle isn't anything too big as she tries to make up with him soon afterwards. They have a chat and she learns that on the day that she invited him, her mother had committed suicide. Thus begins Kakeru's main struggle through the course of this manga, as he believes he is the one responsible because she was apparently unstable and had told him to come home straight away. Funny enough, if this had been prevented by Naho following the letter, then the rest of the notes would be useless. So it's almost she knew that there was no way she would believe her anyway. Anyway, after feeling bad about this, she manages to give him the lunch he prepared and says that she will call him every morning. And yes, she will indeed be trying to baby him for the rest of the manga. Which is kinda why the two, unfortunately, don't really share much chemistry with each other. Well, it's not like they have nothing, but more than anything, they are just full of dramatic tension all the time. Now, granted, one of the positive things this manga does is it treats Kakeru's drama well to an extent. What I mean by that is that his trauma can't necessarily be cancelled out immediately, due to the characters forcing it by some dramatic event like many other manga/anime are guilty of. This is something that's going to take some time, and the characters understand that. Of course, like said before, the negative is that almost too much focus is given to it. Granted, Kakeru being the one interesting character gets quite a bit of development as the story goes on as a result. It's just a shame none of the other characters really get that love. You're shown another flash forward of the 5 of them digging up the time capsules they had buried from 10 years ago. While everyone had their dreams of what they wanted to be when they grew up written inside, Kakeru's contained no such thing, as he only listed his thoughts and feelings for each character inside. Cueing that Kakeru's death was perhaps no accident, as he obviously didn't consider having a future, and that it was in fact suicide, which later gets confirmed by his grandmother to the cast. Back to the present again, yeah, this might get confusing, Naho's next course of action is to get Kakeru to join the club. However, because of her previous actions, Kakeru has indeed already joined the club himself without her having to do anything. It's this subtle use of the butterfly effect which actually makes the series entertaining to read, because I found myself wondering how his choices and actions would change based on what the letter said and what the character would actually perform for himself. Unfortunately, things don't change enough in Naho's favor right away, as a girl by the name of Ueda has confessed to Kakeru. And yes, she is a simple, shallow bully character with no depth whatsoever. I'm okay with bully characters really, but don't just create them to stir up drama, as they will never be seen as anything but shallow and forgettable. Kakeru asks in a note if it's okay for them to go out, but she isn't honest with her feelings soon enough, and as a result they do indeed start going out. And then while Nano wallows in sadness, you learn the true meaning of the title Orange, as she's seen drinking orange juice and describes it as a sad and painful taste. Huh, I guess. I'm sure it has more meaning than that, but I always felt the title was kind of flimsy. But then again, I don't really care about titles too much, to be perfectly honest. Anyway, this whole Ueda arc is used mainly as a tool to tackle Naho's cowardice a tad more. I'm not going to focus it on too much because really, it plays out basically the same way as any bully arc, and it's shortly done away with. Naho gets more honest and of course closer to Kakeru as a result, where he obviously starts liking her. Funny enough, Naho never realizes that Kakeru likes her, even though it's clearly obvious to everyone. Yeah, I know this is a common story trope among these things, but the thing that extends it into the just plain laughable territory is that even in 10 years in the future, she never realizes this. Considering his actions, and considering the very last text message he sent before his death, this is just absurd to believe, and Naho goes from being naive to a complete and total dunce. Though that's strangely appropriate, and this will be the only time I pick on an individual line she says, but in the following chapter she makes the assumption that maybe Kakeru's problems involve his mother. No, I'm sure it involves him not being a starter on the soccer team. The suicide of his mother is just, the icing on the cake. That's the kind of thing about her inner monologue, is not only is it uninteresting and repetitive, but it just points out how stupid she is. I believe there's an anime adaptation in the works, and if that's the case, the biggest fix I would make is let her facial expressions doing more of the talking rather than what's actually going on in her head, because what's going on in her head is usually told by her facial expressions anyway. The future changes a bit more with Naho and Kakeru going on a small date, which isn't a real date because they had to drag out them actually going out, and him gifting her a present. And then the manga tries to explain time travel to us scientifically. Basically, the only logical way it could think of was by the use of black holes. This later continues to the most absurd and terrible scene in the entire manga, which I'll just talk about now. So, the way their future selves send letters to the past is by sending letters to the Bermuda Triangle, which even though that was a total myth, that it perhaps had a black hole, they do it anyway, and it worked. Because the sheer fact of moving on never crossed anybody's mind except for Hagita. In fact, he's the only one who acts reasonable in this whole scene, or in general. Of course, the rest of the characters ignore him and never listen to anything he has to say because they just want to deny reality. Because even though it successfully worked, their future selves would never know if it did. So really, what's the point? They're still going to have regrets, and if the concept of parallel worlds exists, then it's very possible that Kakeru doesn't die in every timeline, even if they don't do anything about it. I get that losing a friend is painful, but honestly, this is just not healthy. Hagita really needed to give them all a good slap or something. I might have talked about all that a tad too early, but don't worry, I still have plenty to complain about in regards to the future section. Naho continually grows a bit more confident in herself when she manages to ask out Kakeru to the cultural festival so they can watch fireworks together. Kakeru does feel a bit bad about this because he realizes that Sua likes Naho, as does everyone besides Naho because, well, it's obvious. Even in this chapter, when Hagita spells it out for her, she still doesn't believe it. And unfortunately, this is where the writer is just making plot-induced stupidity. My guess they did this because if Naho was able to figure out that Sua likes her, well, then she might not have ended up with Kakeru at the end. And apparently that's a problem, and you know what, let's just save that for later. Ueda continues her bullying rampage on Naho a bit more in this chapter, even though she's already broken up with Kakeru, and I guess she's not satisfied yet. Of course, Naho's friends help her out, and her future self leaves literally one of the most inconsiderate messages there is. See, Suwa helps her out and she tells him that she should thank Suwa because it would make him happy. Why is this so inconsiderate? Well, because in this letter, she hardly mentions Suwa at all, despite that it's her future fucking husband. Yet, everything she says in the letter is basically leading her to be hooked up with Kakeru. I guess this is somewhat justified by the fact that she never realized Kakeru liked her, but the thing is, she knew that she did indeed like Kakeru at this time. It just makes her feel overly wishy-washy on how she even leaves out important details about Suwa in favor of Kakeru, though we haven't really hit that point yet. Now we get to the real, why are they not going out yet aspect of the manga. Kakeru asks her at the beginning of chapter 7 which guy she would go out with between him, Suwa, and Hagita. Of course, she's too embarrassed to answer and instead proceeds to ask him which girl he would go out between her and the other two. And yes, I've already forgotten their names because of how little importance they actually are. Of course, he refrains from answering at the moment as well, but of course both give their answer by the end, and as a consequence, still aren't going out. Granted, it's somewhat reasonable in Kakeru's case because of the trauma he faced with his mother that's plaguing his mind, but it does also feel like the manga's being a bit padded out due to the fact that the author just doesn't want them together that easily, or to the very end because that's how every shoujo manga has to be, isn't it? But I'll throw her a bone and say this aspect at least works reasonably well because it makes Kakeru not come off as irresponsible, even though he was able to casually go out with Ueda, so never mind. The fireworks scene is cute though, even if the bullying was just unnecessary drama that really doesn't go anywhere. Afterwards, Naho finally looks up the date that Kakeru dies and all the details, meaning of course she and her friends could easily prevent his death with this knowledge. But somehow, someway, they still manage to screw it up at the end, even though they know exactly where it takes place. Also, other inconsiderate line of Naho's written, "I want you to never leave him alone." Anyway, the main gist is that because she knows the death is suicide, that she has to not only prevent the accident, but save his heart as well. As to follow up on this, Naho convinces Kakeru at the Bonbon Festival to open up about some of his doubts. I do like this because even though it's clearly not the guy's fault that his mother committed suicide, you could see how someone in his position would continually blame themselves for the consequences regardless. Despite it definitely cheering him up, Naho becomes a broken mess of worry because she's just not sure how to save him. Hint, Naho, make him see a therapist! Hint, hint. So she decides to finally confide to Suwa about the letter from the future. And then, it happens. Apparently, Suwa also sent himself a letter from the future about his regrets of not saving Kakeru. Of course, knowing this, you could easily reason out that the rest of them do as well. I think this is where the manga started to get a tad weaker overall because this plot device is just so silly. Making it so everyone has letters to help Kakeru out just makes them feel like they're all playing the same role, which in turn helps them stand out less. Plus, like I pitched about it before, it makes all the characters seem way too caught up in the past. What they're doing is the equivalent of Kakeru, after being saved, that he sends a letter to his past self in order to save his mother and the regrets he had. Why not just do that, Because at the end of the manga, it makes sense for him to start moving on, as should all of them. It's called, life or something. Yes, I will probably bitch about this every time I get to this, so yeah, sorry. Anyway, Suwa and Naho join forces with a desperate attempt to please Kakeru's every whim. I get where they are coming from, but god does it make things feel so awkward and unnatural now, because now it just feels like they are full-on babying him for the rest of the manga, even more than before. The two figure out Kakeru's birthday is coming up and everyone in the group plans to give him presents by all asking what he wants. The end result is by the end of his party, well, sort of party, more just gift giving, he finally, essentially confesses his feelings to Naho without words. Thankfully, she gets the hint, so I guess she's not that stupid. But they'll still pad this out for a while longer. Naho and Suwa realizes that it's close to a day when Kakeru first attempted suicide, so now they will awkwardly try to prevent that. Though because Kakeru is different than the way he was in the past world, Suwa hypothesizes that there may be no need to do anything, but it's still within the realm of possibility that he'll commit suicide. So Suwa proceeds to give him a dramatic bro hug, explaining that no one wants him to die, and that he should be more open about his feelings with his friends. And finally, Naho confesses her feelings of love to Kakeru. This is a bit awkwardly sprung on because Suwa obviously has way too much knowledge. Hey man, have you ever thought about dying? Which makes sense for Suwa to know, but yeah, it works for Kakeru because he's kind of a broken mess and just never bothers putting the puzzle pieces together that people clearly are able to figure him out far too easily, despite him being distant with his personal feelings with the group. Though it's not a terrible scene, and the characters' emotions are sincere because their relationship with Kakeru is natural enough by this point, therefore I still consider it a fairly good scene. The athletic meet is soon coming up, and Kakeru is chosen to be one of the runners. However, the letter had explained to somehow get him out of that predicament because while running during it, he collapses and causes his team to lose, making the guy even more depressed than he already is. However, Kakeru in fact wants to compete in this athletic meet and isn't feeling the same pressure that he was in the other world. This is where his subtle development becomes kind of enjoyable to watch and the intrigue with the letter builds. Before, it was obvious they should follow the letter's advice mostly. However, now they have to make decisions based on the changes in Kakeru whether or not to follow the letter. Following this, the entire group of friends makes it so that they are running with Kakeru during this in order to make things more fun for him. It's also where you learn that the other three characters also sent themselves letters from the future. Not a fan of that personally, but whatever. In all honesty, this was my favorite part, and I believe it to be the best part of the manga. You could tell that they had essentially already saved him by this point in the manga, despite some heavy drama that happens in the future, and it's easy to root for both Kakeru and the group. It's not just a cheap victory at an athletic festival, it's a mental victory for Kakeru on finally being a stronger person. Kinda random right now, but I'm going to guess that it's someone implied in this timeline that Hagida and Azu, somehow I remembered her name, even though I said it in the introductory section, are going to end up as a couple in the future. The only reason they didn't in the other timeline, I'm guessing, is because the group as a whole drifted apart after Kakeru died. Though there's still confirmation on this, but I kinda like that due to the fact that them affecting Kakeru's future also affects the future of others, as Hagida points out later, because they made it so another class lost that was supposed to win. I'm also guessing Suwa might, this is a bit of a stretch, might be going out with the long-haired girl in the future. I think her name was Taka or something, as she seems the most conscious of Suwa's feelings. Yes, even I can think in a shipper's mindset at times. But more than anything, I just like to notice these little subtle foreshadowings where it's applied. Before the athletic meet starts, there's a more romantic chapter with Kakeru and Naho going home holding an umbrella together to shelter from the rain. Something dramatic happens that makes things awkward, and then once again they reinforce that they like each other but won't be going out. Yeah, kind of redundant overall and probably could have been cut out entirely. After all that, you're given another flash forward where future Naho tells you that even if that Kakeru had lived, she would have gone out with Suwa because she was so happy about his confession. And this is the biggest load of bullshit this manga has to offer so far, ironically. There is nowhere in the future or the present where we have been shown that she thinks about Suwa more than Kakeru. And like I said before, in the letters she hardly even mentions him, and even leaves out the fact that Suwa confesses to her. Why? Because she wanted it to be a surprise? Everything in her letter would point to her becoming closer to Kakeru, so there's no way she's so stupid that she doesn't realize what she's doing. And even if she got together with Suwa afterwards, there's no way the audience would believe it based on what we've seen, as she's been literally obsessed with Kakeru. Granted, you could argue that her feelings would be different in this timeline because she's closer to Kakeru here, so maybe future Naho didn't realize that would happen, but honestly, that just makes her friggin' irresponsible, which is basically what Hagida points out later, and no one listens to him, of course. The New Year's festival is just about to happen, and the letters warn Naho that she makes Kakeru very angry and to be careful, otherwise things will end up awkward between them. So she manages to be far too overly careful, and she makes him very angry and things end up awkward between them. Hey, at least she's not perfect, unlike Saint Suwa coming up to her rescue. I've been waiting until now to talk about Suwa, but good God, he is the biggest wet dream, saint, martyr, Gary Stew, fantasy, whatever you want to call him in this manga. See, he was supposed to confess to her here, and that would seal the fate of them going out in the future, according to the bullshit lives of Naho, that is. However, he doesn't because his future self, who is indeed married to her, tells him not to. What? Just what? This goes far beyond being a good friend. This is psychotically self-sacrificial. Dude, you're not just sacrificing your future, you're sacrificing your kid. Stop and think about that for a second. Oh wait, no one really does that in this manga. See, Suwa is always painted as the character who is literally without any flaws. He's handsome, muscular, athletic, caring, compassionate, self-sacrificing, willing to defend his friends whenever they are in danger, hardworking, and just about everything else you can think of. What's his negative traits? I guess that he's just overly self-sacrificial, but that's not enough to make him believable or interesting. Yes, the biggest problem with Sua is he's just flat out boring because of him being too overly wish fulfillment. The last time this manga could have been interesting is him actually confessing his feelings to Naho, and even that wouldn't have made him selfish at all, as he would never force him to love her or get in Kakeru's way. So yeah, author, keep your characters more well-rounded next time, as you essentially have one realistically flawed character, a dunce, 3 bland cheerleaders, and a Gary stew. Next chapter, we have a flashback showing the perspective of the Kakeru who actually committed suicide from the other parallel world. It's interesting because it shows all the development he didn't get and why it would lead him to suicide there, but not in this world. However, one thing that seems a bit messy to me is that the reason he commits suicide is that he finds his mother's last text message. Essentially, the reason she was apparently being so unreasonable with him before was because she just didn't want Kakeru to have any bad memories. However, she realizes she went too far and was just making him miserable instead. Therefore, she chooses to commit suicide, to leave him with more bad memories. From my understanding, Kakeru made it apparent that his mother was psychologically unstable, but from this message, it seems as though he just misunderstood her. So, because of this, her committing suicide actually seems rather far-fetched now. Did she really think that would actually help him out? I feel like the author was better off leaving her just psychologically unstable, as doing this just makes the entire story rather unbelievable as a whole. Anyway, now we're essentially on the last stretch of the manga. Because of the New Year's event, the distance between Naho and Kakeru is more awkward than ever. They basically have typical distance drama, but eventually make up when Naho finally gets her last bit of character development to just be completely honest with her feelings. And finally, at the end of the manga, they go out together. Okay, never mind, maybe she was just padding this out all along. Now all that's left is for the very final day where he had died in the letter to pass. What happens is of course completely ridiculous, as preventing his death simply would be as easy as stalking him for a day. Yeah, it would have been awkward, but seriously, just let it happen guys, it's just for one day, and you'd save his life. Of course, he still tries to commit suicide despite everything that's happened once he finds the text message from his mother, and of course he doesn't actually go through with it. You know, despite the fact that it was built up and foreshadowed to, it still feels overly dramatic and unnecessary. Considering the character development Kakeru got, it would have made sense for him to be crushed, but it would have been much better for him to go and literally go and talk to his friends about it for once. This shows a lack of character development, if anything, because his reason for not going through with it was because he realized that being with them was fun. But because we needed stupid Hollywood movie drama of them running up to him at the second the truck's about to hit him and misses, we can say screw you to believable drama. See, the problem is that Kakeru never really went up to his friends to talk about his problems, or went to a therapist, it seems. And that's kinda what the whole point of the manga was supposed to be about. His friends lightening his load. But, oh well, we get a dramatic and cheesy ending out of it, so I guess whatever. And thus ends Orange. A fun read mostly, but never really turns into anything meaningful. Still, it was only 5 volumes, and I'm glad I read it. And hopefully the author can improve on the weaknesses in this manga with something a bit more fleshed out and interesting next time.